In 1483, in the city of Andijan, a boy was born who would one day alter the course of South Asian history. His name was Babur. At birth, there was little to suggest that this young prince, whose family ruled only a modest Central Asian principality, would eventually establish one of the greatest empires the Indian subcontinent had ever known. Babur's heritage, however, carried immense prestige. Through his father, Umar Sheikh Mirza II, he was a direct descendant of the great conqueror Timur. Through his mother, Kutluf Nigar Khanum, he traced his ancestry to Genghis Khan through the Chagatai line. These legendary bloodlines brought honor, but they also created enormous expectations. Babur grew up believing he belonged to a dynasty destined for greatness. That destiny was tested almost immediately. In 1494, when Babur was only 12 years old, his father died unexpectedly after falling from a pigeon tower. The young prince suddenly inherited the small principality of Fergana, surrounded by ambitious rivals, powerful relatives, and restless nobles. His claim to the throne was fragile, and many doubted that a child could survive the ruthless politics of Central Asia. From the beginning of his reign, Babur faced conspiracies, rebellions, and betrayals. Powerful neighboring rulers saw an opportunity to seize his lands, while even some of his own allies shifted their loyalties whenever it suited their interests. Instead of enjoying the protected childhood typical of many princes, Babur was forced to make military decisions, negotiate with rival factions, and defend his inheritance before he had even reached adulthood. These early struggles shaped the ruler he would become. They taught him that noble ancestry alone could not secure a kingdom. Survival demanded courage, adaptability, and unwavering determination. Many kings inherit powerful empires and spend their lives preserving them. Babur inherited only a small, vulnerable principality and a dream far greater than the land he ruled. Sometimes history's greatest empires begin not with overwhelming power, but with a young prince who refuses to surrender an impossible dream. For the young Babur, one city represented far more than a military objective. Samarkand, the magnificent capital once ruled by his ancestor Timur, symbolized legitimacy, prestige, and the restoration of his family's former glory. To possess Samarkand was to prove himself worthy of his extraordinary lineage. At just 15 years old, Babur achieved what many believed impossible. In 1497, after a determined campaign, he captured Samarkand. But victory proved short-lived. While he celebrated the conquest, unrest broke out in his homeland of Fergana. Forced to divide his attention, Babur soon lost control of both territories. The kingdom he had inherited and the city he had fought so hard to win slipped from his hands almost simultaneously. It was only the beginning of a painful cycle. Over the following years, Babur repeatedly attempted to recover Samarkand, only to be driven back by stronger rivals, shifting alliances, and the growing power of Muhammad Shaybani Khan, whose Uzbek forces steadily expanded across Central Asia. Each campaign demanded immense sacrifice, yet each ended in disappointment. Every victory seemed temporary, and every defeat threatened to erase what little remained of his power. There were periods when Babur possessed no kingdom at all. Reduced to wandering through mountains and valleys with only a small band of loyal followers, he lived a life far removed from the luxury expected of a prince. Food was often scarce, resources were limited, and every journey carried the risk of betrayal or attack. Many former allies abandoned him when fortune turned against him, while others chose to serve stronger rulers who offered greater security. Babur later recorded these hardships with remarkable honesty in the Baburnama, describing not only military campaigns, but also the loneliness, uncertainty, and frustration that accompanied years of exile. Rather than presenting himself as an invincible conqueror, he revealed the emotional burden of watching his greatest ambitions repeatedly collapse despite relentless effort. For many rulers, repeated failure would have marked the end of their story. For Babur, it became the beginning. Each defeat taught him lessons about leadership, strategy, patience, and resilience. The dreams he had pursued in Central Asia seemed to be slipping beyond reach, but they also forced him to look toward new horizons. History often remembers the empires that succeed. It sometimes forgets the years of hardship that made their founders strong enough to build them. Babur's greatest achievement did not emerge from uninterrupted victory. It was forged through exile, disappointment, and the determination to rise again after every fall. After years of defeat, exile, and uncertainty, Babur finally found the opportunity that would reshape his destiny. In 1504, taking advantage of political instability in the region, he marched into Kabul and seized control of the city with relatively little resistance. For the first time in many years, Babur possessed not just a fortress, but a stable kingdom from which he could rebuild his fortunes. Kabul became far more than a refuge. Situated at the crossroads of Central Asia, Persia, and the Indian subcontinent, the city occupied a strategically important position for trade, diplomacy, and military campaigns. Unlike the constant struggles he had endured in Fergana and Samarkand, Kabul offered Babur the breathing space to strengthen his rule without immediately facing overwhelming enemies. He devoted the following years to consolidating his authority. Loyal commanders who had remained with him through years of hardship were rewarded with positions of trust, while new alliances helped secure the surrounding regions. Babur reorganized his administration, improved the city's defenses, and built a disciplined army experienced in mountain warfare and fast-moving cavalry tactics. Years of hardship had transformed both the prince and his followers into seasoned veterans who understood the realities of survival better than many larger armies. Although Babur never abandoned his dream of recovering his ancestral lands in Central Asia, circumstances continued to work against him. The growing strength of the Uzbek ruler Muhammad Shaybani Khan and the changing balance of power made reclaiming Samarkand increasingly difficult. Gradually, Babur began looking in another direction. To the east lay Hindustan. The Indian subcontinent was wealthy, politically fragmented, and divided among competing kingdoms and ambitious rulers. The Delhi Sultanate, under the rule of the Lodi dynasty, faced growing internal disputes, while several regional nobles were dissatisfied with the authority of Sultan Ibrahim Lodi. To Babur, these divisions presented an opportunity unlike anything he had encountered in Central Asia. His ambitions slowly changed. Instead of endlessly pursuing the cities he had lost, he began imagining a future beyond the mountains of Afghanistan. The dream of restoring Timur's empire gave way to the possibility of creating an entirely new one. History often turns when leaders choose to abandon the path that has brought them only disappointment. For Babur, Kabul was not the end of his journey. It was the place where years of failure became the foundation for an even greater ambition. Sometimes, the road to greatness begins precisely where defeat comes to an end. By the early 16th century, Babur had secured his position in Kabul, but he knew that his resources alone could not satisfy his ambitions. To the east, the political landscape of Delhi Sultanate was becoming increasingly unstable. Internal rivalries, dissatisfied nobles, and weakening central authority created an opportunity that an experienced commander like Babur could not ignore. At the center of this instability stood Ibrahim Lodi, the final ruler of the Lodi dynasty. Although he commanded a vast kingdom stretching across much of northern India, his reign was troubled by conflict with powerful Afghan nobles and regional governors. Several influential figures, frustrated with Ibrahim's leadership, sought outside support and opened communication with Babur, encouraging him to intervene in Indian politics. For Babur, the invitation aligned with ambitions he had already begun to develop. He had previously launched several smaller expeditions across the Indus River, testing the defenses of northern India and familiarizing himself with its geography. These campaigns convinced him that a full-scale invasion, though risky, was possible. Yet Babur understood that numbers alone would not determine the outcome. The forces of the Delhi Sultanate greatly outnumbered his own. To overcome this disadvantage, he relied on military methods that had proven effective in Central Asia and the Middle East, but were still relatively unfamiliar in northern India. His army included experienced cavalry, disciplined formations, and, most importantly, field artillery and matchlock firearms commanded by skilled Ottoman-trained gunners such as Ustad Ali Tsiuli and Mustafa Rumi. Babur also adopted defensive battlefield techniques, including the strategic placement of carts linked by rawhide ropes to protect his artillery while creating controlled firing positions. Combined with highly mobile cavalry capable of flanking enemy forces, These tactics gave his smaller army a significant tactical advantage against larger opponents relying primarily on traditional methods of warfare. Even with these innovations, success was far from certain. Babur was preparing to march into unfamiliar territory against an opponent who possessed superior numbers, vast resources, and the prestige of ruling northern India. Failure would almost certainly mean the end of everything he had spent decades rebuilding. But throughout his life, Babur had learned that the greatest opportunities often carried the greatest risks. The campaign into India was more than another military expedition. It was the greatest gamble of his life. History rarely rewards those who wait for perfect certainty. More often, it remembers those willing to risk everything for a vision that others believed was impossible. On April 21st, 1526, the fate of northern India was decided on the plains near the town of First Battle of Panipat. After decades of exile, defeat, and relentless struggle, Babur stood before the greatest challenge of his life. Facing him was the army of Ibrahim Lodi, ruler of the Delhi Sultanate. The odds heavily favored the Sultan. While the exact numbers remain debated by historians, Babur's force was significantly smaller than Lodi's army, which included tens of thousands of soldiers and a large number of war elephants. On paper, Babur appeared hopelessly outmatched, but throughout his life, he had learned that battles were not won by numbers alone. Drawing upon military techniques refined in Central Asia and influenced by Ottoman warfare, Babur carefully prepared the battlefield. His men linked hundreds of carts together with rawhide ropes to create a defensive barrier that protected his artillery and matchlock infantry. Gaps between the wagons allowed cavalry to launch sudden attacks, while experienced gunners under commanders such as Ustad Ali Tsuli delivered coordinated cannon fire against the advancing enemy. For many of Ibrahim Lodi's troops, the thunder of field artillery was unlike anything they had experienced before. The explosions disrupted formations, frightened men and elephants alike, and weakened the momentum of repeated assaults. As confusion spread through the Sultan's army, Babur ordered his highly mobile cavalry to execute flanking maneuvers, surrounding portions of the opposing force and attacking from multiple directions. The battle gradually turned in Babur's favor. Amid the fierce fighting, Ibrahim Lodi refused to retreat. He continued leading his soldiers until he was killed on the battlefield alongside many of his loyal commanders. With the Sultan's death, organized resistance collapsed, and Babur secured a decisive victory. The consequences reached far beyond a single battlefield. The defeat ended the Lodi dynasty and brought the Delhi Sultanate to an end. In its place, Babur laid the foundations of what would become the Mughal Empire, a state that would dominate much of the Indian subcontinent for more than 3 centuries and leave an enduring legacy in politics, architecture, art, and culture. For Babur, the victory carried a deeply personal meaning. The young prince who had lost Fergana, failed repeatedly to hold Samarkand, and wandered through years of exile had finally achieved the lasting kingdom he had spent much of his life seeking. His triumph at Panipat was not simply the reward for one campaign. It was the culmination of decades of perseverance against overwhelming odds. History often changes slowly, but sometimes a single day and a single battle alter the destiny of millions. Panipat was one of those moments. Victory at the First Battle of Panipat gave Babur control of Delhi and Agra, but it did not guarantee lasting rule. The collapse of the Delhi Sultanate created a power vacuum rather than immediate stability. Many Afghan nobles refused to recognize Babur's authority, while powerful regional rulers prepared to challenge the new conqueror. Babur quickly realized that winning a throne was only the beginning. Securing it would be an even greater test. The greatest threat came from the Rajput Confederacy led by Rana Sanga, one of the most respected warrior kings of northern India. Having united several Rajput rulers and allied with other opponents of Babur, Rana Sanga sought to drive the Central Asian invader from Hindustan before his position became secure. The decisive confrontation came in 1527 at the Battle of Kanwa. Once again, Babur faced an opponent renowned for courage and commanding a formidable army. Rather than abandoning the methods that had brought victory at Panipat, he relied on disciplined formations, field artillery, matchlock firearms, and coordinated cavalry maneuvers. The battle was fiercely contested, but Babur's tactical organization ultimately overcame the Rajput coalition. The victory significantly strengthened his control over northern India and removed the most serious immediate challenge to his rule. Even after these military successes, governing remained a complex task. Babur ruled over a vast and diverse population composed of different languages, cultures, and religious traditions. His administration inherited many institutions of the Delhi Sultanate, while introducing trusted commanders and officials from his own service. Although his reign in India was relatively brief, he worked to establish stable governance, reward loyal supporters, and maintain order across newly conquered territories. Babur's leadership reflected both adaptability and experience. Years of hardship in Central Asia had taught him to value discipline over numbers and preparation over confidence. He combined mobile cavalry tactics with effective use of gunpowder weapons, helping to introduce a new style of warfare that would influence military campaigns across the subcontinent for generations. By the end of his reign, the foundations of the Mughal Empire had been firmly established. The empire would later be expanded by rulers such as Akbar, but its success rested upon the state that Babur created through persistence, military innovation, and determined leadership. History often celebrates the conqueror who wins a kingdom. Yet Babur understood a harder truth. Winning a kingdom is difficult. Keeping it is the challenge that defines an empire. To history, Babur is remembered as a conqueror. Yet beyond the battlefield, he revealed a remarkably different side of his character, one preserved in his own words rather than the accounts of others. Babur was an accomplished poet and writer who composed verses in Chagatai Turkic and left behind one of the most important autobiographies of the early modern world, the Baburnama. Unlike many royal chronicles that focus solely on victories and political achievements, the Baburnama offers an unusually personal account of its author. Babur wrote candidly about military defeats, friendships, landscapes, emotions, and the hardships of exile, allowing historians a rare glimpse into the thoughts of a ruler in his own voice. He also possessed a deep appreciation for nature. Throughout his life, Babur described mountains, rivers, flowers, and fruit trees with remarkable attention to detail. He commissioned gardens in the Persian charbagh style, believing that carefully designed green spaces could bring beauty and order to the cities he ruled. His interest in architecture and landscape would later influence the artistic traditions of the Mughal Empire. This contrast made Babur an exceptional figure. The same man who commanded armies and fought relentless campaigns also found comfort in poetry, books, and gardens. His life reminds us that even the greatest conquerors are more than the battles they fight. Beyond the crown and the sword, Babur carried dreams that reached far beyond the battlefield. In the final years of his life, Babur devoted himself to securing the future of the empire he had built through decades of struggle. After a lifetime spent fighting for survival, from the valleys of Fergana to the plains of northern India, he finally ruled a stable kingdom. But the years of constant campaigning had taken their toll. Babur died in Agra on December 26, 1530, at the age of 47. The throne passed to his eldest son, Humayun, who inherited both a promising empire and the difficult task of preserving it. Although Humayun's reign would face serious setbacks, the dynasty Babur founded endured. His grandson Akbar transformed the Mughal state into one of the world's greatest empires, while later rulers such as Shah Jahan left behind architectural masterpieces, including the Taj Mahal, that continue to define the cultural heritage of South Asia. For more than 3 centuries, the Mughal Empire influenced the politics, economy, art, architecture, literature, and administration of the Indian subcontinent. Much of that legacy can be traced back to the determination of one ruler who refused to accept defeat, even when he had lost nearly everything. That is perhaps Babur's greatest lesson. Was his greatest victory the conquest of India? Or was it the resilience that carried him through years of exile, repeated failure, and shattered ambitions until opportunity finally appeared? History remembers Babur as the founder of an empire, but his story begins long before his greatest victory. He entered the world as a young prince who lost his kingdom before he was old enough to understand its value. He died as the founder of a dynasty that would shape the history of the Indian subcontinent for more than 3 centuries. Sometimes, The greatest legacy is not built by those who never fall, but by those who refuse to remain defeated.